I'm Shelby, and this is Filmish Chats. Hello and welcome. I'm Shelby Cook, head curator and editor-in-chief at Film East, and today I'm joined by my fellow team members, Will Schofield, Ishnor, and Bella Madge, to discuss the latest addition to the PCU, Paddington in Peru. This episode is part of Film East Online, a space for free online content in varying media to educate, inform, and inspire all things cinema. Film East is a multi-award-winning global film organization based in the east of England and the east coast of the United States. Before we get into the episode, we have a very special announcement. Film East is headed to Canada. I will be attending the 50th edition of the Toronto International Film Festival as official press on behalf of Film East. Throughout the festival, we will be sharing our reviews of select films over on our Instagram, as well as providing daily updates about interviews, talks, and more. Leave us a comment and let us know what films you want us to cover, and we'll do our best to get you the reviews that you want. Make sure you're following us on Instagram at films_east to get all of the TIFF content. Now, on to Paddington. If you've been following Film East for a while, you'll know that we stan Paddington Bear. He is, completely unironically, the GOAT. So of course, we had to talk about the latest addition to the Paddington Cinematic Universe. When Paddington discovers that his beloved Aunt Lucy has gone missing from the home for retired bears, he and the Brown family head to the jungles of Peru to find her. Determined to solve the mystery, they soon stumble upon a legendary treasure as they make their way through the rainforests of the Amazon. Here's Film East chatting about Paddington in Peru. All right, so we are here at this funeral, mourning the death of our beloved Paddington Bear. We're discussing Paddington 3. Our king, what's his name? Paul King. He did us bad. He left the Paddington series, left it in the hands of capitalists, and now Paddington he's questionable. He's questionable. So, of course, let's start off with the question that we always start with. What did we think of Paddington 3? I'm sorry, it's called Paddington in Peru. That's the official title of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard because the first two set such a high bar, and then you come to Paddington in Peru, and I just feel like it didn't fit in with the vibe of the first two, like, at all. I think that's just where I had my initial problem. It's just, it didn't, like, atmosphere-wise, didn't feel right at all. And maybe that's just because they recast the mum. I think as soon as they recast the mum, I was just like, I'm not on board with this film anymore.
Yeah, I think the lack of Sally Hawkins was like, it just like kind of,
Yeah.
the thing that I had, the problem that I had with Paddington in Peru is it just felt like it knew that it was a Paddington movie. I think it was pandering much more to like a childlike audience, whereas I felt like the original two Paddington movies were created more of like as independent movies. They felt more like art house films that were for adults as much as they were for, I think maybe even more so for adults than they were for the child audience. Because, a lot of people, when you say, oh, Paddington's one of my favorite movies, they're like, isn't that, no one had seen it. And now all of a sudden Paddington has blown up. He's everywhere. And I think that they're pandering more towards that child audience, to the child film. What does everyone else think?
I'm
Um,
I'm gonna be controversial here. So Paddington has
Oh,
been a member of Film East longer than I have.
he's been our
He's
he's been our mascot.
he's been around,
He's our board of directors.
he's done the press junket for us. So I'm gonna be careful with what I say. I Going into this, I'd heard nothing but bad things about it. My friends, my lovers, my well wishers had always said naught but negatives. And I came out of it thinking, honestly, to me, it's of an equivalent quality to the first movie. I'd say a little bit lower perhaps, but I'd say in my mind they are of a similar quality. Nowhere near the heights of two, which I think is the bless up magnum opus of the franchise. But I it definitely has a lot of flaws. I think the choice to kind of do away with a lot of the tertiary cast and make it just Paddington and the Browns in one set location really limited it. The loss of Peter Capaldi in the movie was obviously a death knell. I'm sure we were all missing his presence very much. Um, the like you said, the recasting of the mum. I get that Sally Hawkins didn't want to come back for a third one, but I feel like I can't remember the name of the actress who played her in this one, but she just didn't quite nail the
Yeah, she
kind of
didn't nail Mrs. Brown. You're
Yeah.
right.
yeah, the kind of
Yeah.
tweeness of the character. Um, and yeah, and I do agree that some parts felt more formulaic. There'd be times when a scene would be going on, and then suddenly the shot would change, and it'd be Paddington on his own, and it immediately go, "Oh, this is the part where he does slapstick hijinks," which you got to have. It's the Paddington formula. It's what he does. But it felt a lot more like, right, this is the scene where he does some hijinks. Then we get back to the plot. I felt like I could see the screenwriters kind of being like, all right, paragraph, paragraph break, hijinks bit. We'll get back to that later. Paragraph, paragraph. Story continues. But and I don't know whether it's the fact that I wasn't massive on the first one or the fact that this one was better than I was expecting. But yeah, I think compared to that, I didn't mind it so much.
I do want to say, I don't think that it's a terrible movie. I think, like you said, Will, I would rank it at the bottom of the Paddington films. But I don't think it's like, I still found the whimsy in it. I still cracked up at a couple, that freaking chicken shop joke cracks
Oh
me
my
up
God.
every time.
Literally.
I don't know why that was so funny, but that just cracked me. And then when they're in that like bear circle and Antonio Banderas is like, this is a very berry situation. That was the best line delivery I think ever. That was just so funny. So it still had that whimsy of like, I still really enjoyed it, but I think what you said, Will, is franchise. And I think that is where it has started to go wrong, is it is now a franchise. It's akin to more of like the Harry Potters of where the first Harry Potter movie kind of was so magical and so whimsical and it was so unique. And then it sort of started to steer more towards we're making a big blockbuster movie. We want to make money off of this. And this new Paddington film felt, and I can appreciate that they want to go in a different direction. It felt like an adventure movie. It didn't really feel like, it kind of lost the purpose of what Paddington is. And we'll talk more about that. Ishnor, did you have anything?
Yeah, because I mean, I think we'll talk more about it because when I first watched Paddington, it was for my British cinema assignment, and I was making a presentation on it, and I really resonated with it. But when I was watching the third film, I was bored. I was like, it doesn't hold the warmth and the intimacy that it did, and what it did for me. Because for me, Paddington was just not a movie. It was a way for me to feel visible or heard when I just reached the country. So I resonated a lot with that. But when I watched the third one, I was bored halfway. It felt like a chasing spectacle. It felt like, okay, whatever you want to do. It's very like a sanitized, very clear aesthetic sort of a version of it. So like my heart broke while watching it because it is not the same, or it doesn't, for me it doesn't hold the same value as the first film. So yeah, I am very disappointed.
And I think that is, I guess let's start leading into that conversation about the political undertones
Yeah.
of Paddington.
Yeah.
To me, Paddington has always been, this is why I say it was never really a kids movie, because yes, it's goofy. Paddington, the character, comes from a children's book. It is appropriate enough for children to watch, but the undertones of it, this story of an immigrant coming to a different country, has always it's a very like intense story, and it's
Yeah.
always been presented in this very, I mean, the first one, Paddington, literally his home burns down. Like, you know, he has to escape his country. He faces all of this tragedy. His father figure dies. He has to leave his mother figure behind and go to a different place to, you know, be able to live, to have a life. And it's a very dark story. He gets, you know, he feels like an outsider. He feels like he doesn't belong. He has to, you know, there's some of those scenes in the first one where he has to sleep on the streets because he feels like the Browns don't want him there. He faces a lot of racism. He faces a lot of cultural oppression. And so it's always had these very dark undertones to it that presents these very complicated ideas in still a lighthearted way, but still with the care that it deserves. And then, of course, with the second one, you have this idea of, you know, the prison industrial complex of what happens to immigrants when they come, you know, colored immigrants come to a white country. How are they treated differently than the white people, versus the lower class versus the upper class? What happens, you know? So it's always had a lot of that really deep undertones. I think this film tried, Paddington in Peru tried to do that by taking Paddington back to his country, but it didn't treat that story with the respect that I think it should have had. I think it was more concerned with the whimsy, it was more concerned with the fun adventure than it really was with telling the story of an immigrant after so many years living in a completely different country going back home. And I agree with you, Ishnor, that I think maybe you could speak to this more, but my experience with Paddington is I've always really loved him because I'm also, you know, I moved to the UK. You know, as goofy as it is, you know, you see those experiences when you go to a different country and you are an immigrant. You experience those same things as Paddington, and it really feels very, it's hard to watch because you're like, oh, I do understand his struggle, but I also like it's very heartwarming to like see that experience on screen, and it's presented in a way
Yeah.
where Paddington does have that happily ever after. He does find a family, he does find a home.
Yeah. So, I mean, I will talk a bit about the first film, and I can like talk about the third film as well, because for me, it was deeply personal when I was watching Paddington, from how his bear name was changed to Paddington,
Yeah.
how he wears the coat and the hat, how uh, the mannerisms change. He starts using British phrases uh, like it's raining staring as rod, something
Yeah.
something, I don't remember now, right? So all of these things happen, so like I resonated with it because a lot of people could not pronounce my name, so I became Ish, and then I had to stop wearing the kind of clothes I wanted to wear in order to blend in order to like mimic the culture that I am in. So when I could see that happening on the screen, I was like, okay, this is an experience almost every immigrant will have when they enter the country for the first time. And that was really done well. I mean, there was a happily ever after. But then that brings me to another question, that Paddington has to be a good immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
Paddington has to go out of his way to be accepted and cannot be who he is. So, any tonality of where he comes from, or any behaviors or anything, he has to shed in order to be accepted in the larger context of the dominant culture that he is in. So, what if Paddington is also sort of like, what if he commits, what if he makes some mistakes? What if he is a bit naughty? What if like he doesn't is not a good immigrant? Then are we not accepted? Are we not allowed to make any mistakes, or are we not allowed to sort of do things in a different manner? So all of these questions do come to my mind when I watch Paddington, that he's cleaning the windows in the second film, and then he's just running and huffing and puffing and doing everything that needs to be done in order to be kind and everything. But what about his own personal journey and identity? And even when you talk about the Britishness, it is also a constructed Britishness that he has received. So what do you even talk about? Like, how do you even see that or perceive that? So, yeah,
And I can,
these are some of my questions.
well, and I can see that especially with the second film of him going to prison. He's not, obviously he's not guilty of the crime. that he commits. But
Yeah.
people are very, like Mr. Curry, very quick to jump on it and say, it was you because you're the brown person in the neighborhood. You're the person that's not white. You're the person that doesn't belong. And so he gets accused of that crime when he didn't even do that. And I see those are the things that I think are so challenging about those first two movies, is that really like sheds a light on, like they're saying some really intense things with these films and presenting it in, you know, a whimsical childlike manner. Of course it's silly because Paddington goes to prison and everyone's outfits are turned pink, ha ha ha, you know, and it's like goofy, but it is like a very serious thing that they're saying, is that Paddington is accused of this because he's brown, because he's not white,
Yeah.
he's an immigrant.
Yeah.
And I still always think about when I first saw Paddington 2 in the cinema, there was a little boy in front of me and he turned to his dad after Paddington got arrested and he said, but he didn't do anything. You know, so it is showing these kids that this is wrong, you know, this is, and it is building that. But then when you get into Paddington in Peru and they have that opportunity, like you were saying, Ishnor, about what happens, you know, when he's in the country for so long, what happens when he goes back, you know? And Paddington has that experience when he's going through the jungle. He's like, I grew up here, I know that I can lead you through the jungle. And he has that moment alone where he climbs up in the tree and he's overlooking the jungle, and he has that realization of, I don't belong here, it's been so long
Yeah.
since I've been here. And it's those very tender moments that capture the essence of what these Paddington movies have been. But that tender moment lasted 30 seconds in a 90-minute
Yeah.
film that was more concerned with this, you know, adventure plot line than it was with Paddington returning
Yeah.
to Peru.
I do find
Yeah.
it interesting that so much of the previous films was devoted to showing off, you know, British culture and London in particular. They're constantly running around the landmarks and meeting the Queen's Guard and doing this and that, and kind of showing these different almost as if it's like to show off to an outsider's perspective of stereotypically or like British culture, and kind of not quite glorifying, but
But I
a
also,
loving representation of it.
yeah,
And then in this film, where they had the opportunity to do that for Peru or another country, they showed like a llama at
yeah,
one point, and that's about it, really.
yeah.
And like they go to kind of Machu Picchu area. I don't think it was actually Machu Picchu, but that kind of Aztec temple. But
Yeah.
it's never really commented on. It's never really shown off. These Incan, ruins. They're just kind of, again, places for the plot to happen,
And the bears.
rather than an appreciation. Yeah.
The bears get what, 10 minutes of the whole movie, and that's the whole point, is Paddington's going to find his family. Like he's going
Yeah.
there to find his people. Or that's
Yeah.
not his objective. His objective isn't to find the people, but that's the whole point of the story.
Yeah. And also, like, I think more, I mean, we should have had seen more like how Paddington does not identify with where his actual home is, because that is really the truth. I've been in India for like now 3, 4 months, and I don't identify. I
Yeah.
don't understand what's going on. I don't understand what's going on in London, but I still can live there. I like living there. I understand a few things, but when it comes to India, I just genuinely don't know. So I really don't know where do I belong. So like these moments of confusion or these moments of understanding should have been shown, because he just comes and says that, hey, is it okay if I can come back? Let's just a pause and come back with you. And I understand why he says that. But like more fleshing out of that would have been, I don't know, more heartwarming for an audience member like me.
And before I move on to the next thing, just to finish on what you were saying there, is that moment of him saying, can I come back with you, is played more for the Browns than it is for Paddington, because that
Yeah.
focus is put on Mrs. Brown saying, oh, I'm gonna really miss him, and the daughter being like, oh, this is really sad. Like it's that moment of the daughter realizing the mom situation of, my kids are flying the nest. It's played for the Browns. It's not played for
Yeah.
Paddington's experience.
The way he phrased that
Yeah.
as well really bugged me. Like, I know this is just a complete nitpick, and it was written this way to cause a drastic scene, but the way he says, I'd like to stay. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. And he goes, with you guys. It's like,
Uh-huh.
I was talking to my girlfriend after, and it was like, it's like if I went up to her and said, I think we should break up, with the idea of not being together anymore.
Yeah.
Like, there's no,
Yeah.
oh, I
So
know it's a kids movie. I know it's a kids movie.
it's for the dramatic pause.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
reason I wanted to do this episode, of course, like every pretentious film person in the world, after I saw this, of course I go on Letterboxd. I'm gonna rate it, but before I rate it, I have to see what other people are rating it, so I don't look like I'm like rating it bad. So, and I saw this review, and at first I was like, "Oh yeah, she makes a good point." But then I kind of was, as I was driving home, I was sitting and thinking about, it, I was like, "I don't like what that girl said at all." I'm not gonna call out this person, maybe,
Please do.
but I want to read this review that was for Paddington Peru that I saw on Letterboxd. This is our letterbox section. Okay, we should probably make this a regular occurrence of like bad letterbox reviews that we don't agree with. Okay, so this is what it says. Loved the bit where Paddington tore off the clothing of his colonial oppressors and refused to speak their native language anymore and returned to his native tongue. Hated it when when he went back to London, made his Bear family wear British souvenir clothing. Accurate depiction of multiculturalism though. Lol. Now, I think this is feeding a little bit into what you were saying, Ishnor. This is why I wanted to bring this up now. You were saying I don't necessarily feel like I belong in my home country. Yes, this is where my DNA is. This is where I grew
Yeah.
up. It is part of my identity. But you made the decision to go somewhere else. I can speak to
Yeah.
that myself too. Unfortunately, I am American and I am very embarrassed at the moment to be American. I don't want to be American. I don't even want to be here. This is the last place I ever want to be. I would rather be in the middle of the ocean than right here, than in America right now. But yes, when I lived in the UK, it was hard. It was hard being away from your family. It was hard being away from, even as a Westerner and British culture isn't that different from American culture in the grand scheme of things. It was still hard. The differences, people judging you because of, oh, you're American, you must be stupid, those type of things. Of course, I'm not experiencing that to the extent that you're experiencing it, Ishnor, as a white person. But you could still feel that experience of America's not where I belong. I made the choice to move to the UK, and that was my choice to really embrace that culture and to live there and love that. I feel what this letterbox review is kind of missing in their like very dramatic saying that the Browns are colonial oppressors on Paddington and then Paddington does the same thing to his bear friends. I think what they're missing is giving Paddington the agency of saying maybe that is where he wants to be. Maybe that is
Yeah.
what yes, I do understand that the original concept of why Paddington and Uncle Pastuzo and Aunt Lucy love Britain is because of a colonial force. Montgomery Clyde comes in, introduces them to British culture, introduces them to English. But I think what the film is saying is that Montgomery Clyde didn't enact the colonial oppression that he was supposed to enact. He was supposed to kill the bears and bring them back to London for a museum. The same thing with the Browns. I think the Browns are the perfect people for Paddington to have been with because they're not trying to oppress Paddington's identity. They're not trying to force Britishness on him. In fact, they all agree. They're like, let's go to Peru. They all want to go with him
Yeah.
to share in this experience. He says, I'll go on my own to find out Lucy. But they say, we don't want you. We want to be there for you. So I don't know. I have a problem with this comment. What does everyone else think?
I think it's hard because it doesn't leave space for the fact, like you said, Paddington can maybe have mixed feelings about where he belongs and his identity. Because like even in the film, like I did actually really like at the end when he's saying like I'm a little bit of like El Dorado, but a lot of here. And I think even like he's a product of that as well because like when Montgomery Clyde met his aunt and uncle, like he imprinted a lot of British culture on them, and then they were a bit of both. So he always kind of grew up with that like childhood. Like he was imprinted on, I guess, in some ways because of Montgomery Clyde. But I like that the film at the end sort of said, hey, you can be both and have mixed feelings. And I know Shelby and Ishmael, you could speak on that a lot more, but having mixed feelings after you've moved or gone back home is like a very normal experience. And I think this review just doesn't leave, it's like it's so extreme, like one or the other. It's leaving no space in the middle for the film, which literally discusses Paddington having a bit like feeling a bit muddled about where he actually belongs or who he should be with. Like, is it his tribe or his family? And I think this review is just very black and white. And I do find that difficult. I think I can almost see the point they're trying to make, but I think they don't leave any room to actually even think about the fact that the film is all about how
Yeah.
your identity can be like this or the other. I think they've really missed the point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
fluid, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel really weird about the multiculturalism comment at the end. That feels like a real dog whistle to me, to be perfectly honest. Like the immediate, like you say, there are some points in there that are interesting and are worthy of discussion about like where Paddington sits in that position of colonial oppression. Like, yes, he was taken from his birthplace with those bears and moved away, but at the same time, you know, he had no memory of that place. He'd never really grown up there. He was raised by, I mean, a grandmother who herself was kind of grown in British culture. So he's kind of second generation almost in that weird way. And yet there's a lot of real world parallels that could probably be discussed there. But the immediate conclusion of this thesis being, and that's why multiculturalism is bad, is, I don't know, a bit
It's like he doesn't even know
Yeah,
the
I think Yeah, I think the person who reviewed it on the letterbox and that you read, I think has actually lost the point what exactly this movie was about, the initial one. Like it's about togetherness with your own differences can exist.
Yeah.
Within that, a blended identity exists. It is not here or there, because I do resonate with Paddington saying that I am some of that and more of that, because that exists. And I also believe that, I mean, this could be controversial or whatever. For example, when I am in the UK, I dress up the way I have to dress up. Sometimes, for example, my only problem would be like, I feel conscious of wearing a lot of colors. But that doesn't mean that my entire dressing and everything changed. But that also comes from the fact that I come from a very liberal family and I've always dressed up the way I have dressed up in India as well. So that ties into that fact as well. But like missing out on the point, like even if the bears are wearing the clothes that they have to wear or the names or whatever that is happening for the ease of communication. We forget that as well. So I do not agree with the view, and I also don't think so that they do understand what real multiculturalism means. Do they understand? Are they talking about assimilation? Are they talking about integration? Are they talking about a melting pot of cultures? I think they're very in very strict binaries when they're writing that review as well, and I think it's more nuanced than that. Like I don't resonate with my friends back home. I connect more with my British friends. And that is the truth because I have lived there, I've grown there, I've done something there. But my heart is also here. So I can't forget my identity and culture. So, yeah, it's a very confusing state. So I think if the movie would have shown
Yeah.
the confusing state, we would not have had that review.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I don't want to blow this out of proportion because this is just a silly, goofy letterbox review, and I'm sure this person didn't mean this as much as what I'm about to say. But I feel like this is very much the problem that we have in society right now. Why we have this big cultural war of you have to stay in your country or do we have globalization?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's saying you can't appreciate another culture's identity without it being, you know, oppressive. You know, without it
Yeah.
saying, you know, I love British cinema. I grew up on British cinema. Well, now I'm oppressed by the British people because I watched British cinema growing up. Well, that's not true. That's, you know, enjoying someone else's culture. I can make that agency of saying, I love Britain. I love British culture. I can understand the nuances of why Britain's bad. I can understand the nuances of why America's bad, why every nation in the world has issues. You know, the world isn't black. The world isn't black and white. And there's so many people who think in this current crazy political state that, you know, the world is in right now, that things have to go back to being black and white. You know, people want to remove that middle, the gray area of how nuanced the world is. And I think that's that sort of thinking is, on both ends of the spectrum. I'm not just talking about the conservative side. I'm also talking about the liberal side. Liberals are saying, you know, just as much of these very black and white things that are just as bad and just as ineffective as what the Republicans are saying, So it's like people are missing this middle ground. And I don't know, maybe it comes from not having that experience. Maybe it comes from,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's a very unaware stance of living in your home safely and then deciding what the world should look like without having to go through the journeys that the people that we are looking at have gone through. So I do agree with what you have said.
And I want to make a comment on the last part about the Bears visiting London. I think that is such a ridiculous comment to be saying, well, he's dressing the Bears up in Union flags. And no, literally, when you go to a different country, you want to be silly and goofy and wear Union flags. Like, I can't even tell you, the first time I went to the UK, I got an ugly Union flag sweater and I was like, yay, so cool. Like, it's just silly, goofy. It's not that serious. Like, and I do think the changing of the Bears names, that has more of an impact, the changing of the Bears names. But, and Ishna, you touched on this, but I think the dressing them up in, the British souvenirs, like that's like what you do. It's the fact is that the Bears are coming to visit him he still has that part of his family with him, and his family wants to share in that. Just as the Browns went to Peru with Paddington, the Bears want to come to London and experience Paddington's other side, because they still see Paddington as one of them, even though he's not, they obviously he didn't grow up with these people. Obviously he got lost very early on in his life, because not every, they accepted him right away, but Paddington didn't remember any of these people. He didn't remember any of this crap, so I'm sure those people didn't know him either. So it was like, I don't know. I have a hard time thinking that, the Paddington is now enacting colonial oppression on the El Dorado Bears because he brought them to London and put them in Union flag sweaters. Like, I just thought that was just a little ridiculous.
Yeah.
I also, okay, sorry.
Sorry. I think if the film did a better job of blending the political undertones in with like the actual rest of the film, I think it would have helped people who felt like this letterbox user does. Because I think the problem for me is I think whilst the political messaging is like very intrinsic in the first two, it felt like very on the nose in this one. And then at the same time as being quite on the nose, I don't think it blended very well. I think this goes back to like what Will said earlier. It felt quite formulaic in that, oh yeah, now we have a bit where Paddington's being goofy, and then we have a bit of like exposition, and then we go back to like the main plot. I think if at the end they didn't make the part where Paddington is with his, or he sees his tribe in El Dorado, if they didn't make it so clunky and shove it all in at the end, I think that would have helped people sort of get the messaging a bit more, because it just didn't feel very smooth, because all of a sudden they were just like, I could very much tell that they were doing something political, whereas before I definitely picked up on it, but at the end it just felt very clunky. So I think if that was worked on within the film itself, people who think like this, which I don't agree with, probably might have got it a little bit more, because it's very clear that some people, the message just went completely over their heads.
It's like they had Antonio Banderas and they just wanted to use him.
Yeah,
it's like he was the whole story.
Exactly.
It had nothing to do with like Paddington. Like that, I think
Exactly.
I also would like to add one more point in that, because when Paddington comes to London, he is the only bear there, right?
Yep.
So he understands his identity in his own manner, his agency in his own manner. He didn't have other bears to talk to him about it or to make him understand that how to be here. And that is also a very big part. Like when you move to a country, when you meet your people from your own home country, it plays a lot of, it is very important. And sometimes it's not, right? Like I don't have Indian friends in London. I don't have them. So when these bears came to London to meet, to be there, so their only point of context was Paddington. So what Paddington was doing. So we also have to like think it in that manner as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or not?
Paddington
Yeah, because there was no other. Yeah. What he
Paddington's
knows
showing
best.
them what you do when you are a tourist in a country.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what he knows best. So I think it's as simple as that.
So I also wanted to touch on a little bit about where this franchise is going. I think in the past couple of years, this is like before, like I was saying earlier, I think Paddington, when the first two movies came out, it was much more of an indie film. Not many people knew it. I mean, it was very big in like the film cinephile circle because everyone really loved it. But I think like normal people hadn't really seen it. They didn't, when you said Paddington, they didn't know what you were talking about. They thought you were talking about the books. But since Paddington 2, I think maybe since like 2 years ago, I feel like Paddington has really blown up as this franchise, as um, this thing that they're pushing out, this what's the word? IP. Um,
Yeah.
and I know that there is a children's show that also airs in the UK. I haven't watched that because he looks kind of scary in that one. I don't know he's
I'm
like
so glad you
art
said that.
claymation. Like I don't know what his problem is.
Yeah.
Um, so I can see that they're trying to push it more towards the children's side, but it's I think
Yeah.
in the past couple of years, way too much. There's obviously the whole Paddington, all of Paddington Station is just Paddington themed. There's a cafe in there, there's a whole shop, which is fine, you know. But now they have all of these like um afternoon tea buses, which is Paddington themed. They have like a set tour type thing that's in London. They have a West End musical coming out, and it's just like, why are they doing all of this? Like, is
Yeah.
so again, I think they're kind of missing the point. And it's not like these Paddington films are unique in this political undertone. The original books were also political. We're also saying they were still commentary on immigrant and the immigrant experience.
Mm.
So it's not like, you know, we're taking this out of context and saying, well, it's just these films. It's the whole idea of Paddington. This has always been what he's been about.
Yeah.
Is Paddington being turned into a capitalist machine? Do we have to cancel Paddington?
I think
Well,
I think it's difficult because for me the Paddington films because I know we've sort of referenced Harry Potter in the same sort of vein.
Mhm.
I feel like it really fetishizes British culture. And I think that's such a big selling point for like so many reasons because it's like, you know, I'd say like the way British or London is shown in Paddington is like, oh, everyone's very posh, everyone's very nice,
Yeah.
which isn't very true. Lots of tea drinking. You know, Paddington has all like Ishmael was saying, all of these sort of Britishisms. I think that is a really big selling point for I think lots of other cultures love that kind of thing. It's like Downton Abbey. I know lots of people love Downton Abbey because it does sort of fetishize British culture in that way. I think it's such a big selling point that I could see them just growing and growing and growing it. And I think, to be fair, the West End thing is crazy, but for some reason, Britain just seems to be set on making anything into a West End musical. I remember seeing in the news, like, you know, Great British Bake Off. They were turning that into a musical. And I was like,
Okay, that's
how can you do
different.
that? Yeah, I was like,
That's
how can you do that?
enough.
Yeah, so I think it's that thing of just because it's just so it's such a contained little universe that they've created that is like all of the perfect parts of Britain and London specifically. Like people will just keep buying into it because it has that sort of cozier, sweet aspect. Like everything's very neat and pretty. I like to think of Paddington 2 when they were at the prison. No prison in the UK looks like
Yeah,
that.
they have tea
So
parties.
yeah, literally. So I think the people who make Paddington like Hollywood, they know that people will buy into that. So I think Paddington needs to become cancelled before it just grows even more out of proportion. So I agree, definitely.
do you think a
I
factor as well is that during I think the final day of filming Paddington 2, the original author of the books passed away? I can't remember his name.
Oh,
Michael, is it
sure.
Michael Faison? Yeah.
Michael.
Someone else has control of his estate now.
Yeah, and he's become a lot more in this country because Paddington had always kind of been a background figure growing up. There was a little Paddington statue in my hometown, um, growing up, but
Yeah.
he's become a lot more of a political tool in the past few years when quite infamously or famously, depending on your opinions, I guess, when Queen Elizabeth II passed away a few years ago, there was a lot of Paddington um
Theirs.
artwork and official merch isn't the right term, but like
Well, it is. Yeah,
imagery.
it's official merch. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And now it's kind of we're lucky that we already had the Olympics like a decade ago, because I'm sure there'd
Paddington
be
would be
plenty
an
of him
Olympian.
Yeah.
doing causing mischief there. Um, and yeah, he's kind of has become more of gone from a kind of general um pop cultural figure to more of a, I don't know, tool in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
to be
So
used by.
I want to jump in on this because one of my master's research papers was on Paddington as being used as a political tool. And I wrote about how when Paddington 2 came out, Sadiq Khan used the image of Paddington and like these Paddington, people dressed up as Paddington, whatever, um, for the London is Open campaign after Brexit happened. And this campaign of London is always going to be an open city, it's going to be a multicultural city, it's going to be open to immigrants, um, kind of combating the narrative of what Brexit was saying, that we don't want any immigrants here. And Paddington was very much used, and Hugh Bonneville was also very much used in that campaign of London is open. He was very much used as this figurehead of saying, look at how great immigrants are because Paddington Bear he's a silly, goofy guy. And he's, like Ishnor said, a good immigrant. Um, and I think, see, this is what's really interesting to me is Paddington is not big in the US. And so this is why, and I think this is really interesting what you were saying, Bella, is that it does fetishize British culture. I totally agree with that. And I totally agree with the Downton Abbey thing. But Downton Abbey was really big over here. And that's why costume dramas do so well internationally, because it is, oh, it's so British. Ha ha ha. They're drinking their tea and they're putting their finger out and they're playing croquet and all that other stuff. That's why people love seeing Britain in that respect.
Yeah.
But Paddington is not big in the US. I don't know what his demographic is around the rest of the world, but I don't think anyone outside of Britain really cares about Paddington. I don't think like I could pull up the box office numbers, but I'm sure that this new movie did absolutely nothing in the box office here. So it's so interesting to me that it's like British people just wanting to fetishize themselves. It's just wanting to make, because I can't. Ishna, you have something to say.
No, you finish
Okay.
and then I'll
Well, I was
wanna
just
say.
I just think it's so funny because like who's going to see this musical? Like are they expecting tourists to be like to go like and like see Paddington everywhere and be like, who is this bear that we keep seeing everywhere? What is his deal? And then be like, oh, and then go and watch the movies. Like, I don't know. Like it's just, and the bears in all of the statues that have been placed in all of these different cities around the UK as well. Like, I don't know what kind of what they're pushing here with Paddington, but it's just like I just kind of see it as like, is this sort of like I don't want to be so negative and pessimistic about everything, but is it like people trying to push like a return to make Britain great again? This is British identity at its best, because Paddington is the epitome of Britishness, and he's wearing his little hat and his raincoat and he has his umbrella and he's, whatever.
Yeah, I think I agree with you because I think in Britain as well, I think we're living in a time that is sort of harkening back to when Brexit was happening, because at the moment we have people like Nigel Farage and Reform very much campaigning for like taking Britain back for like British people. And I think there are a lot of things. I think Paddington, it almost does become sort of like a nationalism type thing of like we have to remember who we are and like our origins. And I think people do really, I think it can be both ways. And I think that's why when Paddington 3 came out, I found it quite not a rebellion as such, but I found its messaging to be quite important, especially at the time, yeah, when it was released here, because you've got people like Reform on the rise, which is a party that is literally trying. It's a platform that you can that's akin to what Trump is essentially trying to do, and it is just trying to take Britain back and like let British people be in power again and get all of the foreigners out of the country. I think that's why I was quite surprised by Paddington 3's very prominent messaging, because it felt very important at a time here when it definitely needed to happen in that way, where we show multiculturalism as a good thing. So I think as much as it's being planted everywhere for British people to remember, like, oh, here's the things that we should remember, like, you know, all these things that make us us. At the same time, Paddington was a very big symbol in the third film of like, we need to remember that accepting people is also a very good thing. So I think it can definitely, he's definitely a political symbol now, but I think it has been used for both good and bad, without a doubt.
So for me, like when you ask about what's going to happen to Paddington, I think like even when I think about the first movie or the second or the third film, and now I think about them after having experienced living in the UK, it's like Paddington has always been a safe immigrant.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to marmalade.
Mhm.
Like what happens if the food is not marmalade?
Yeah.
What happens if the food which is not liked by anybody? What happens then? And it actually speaks more about not how multicultural and accepting people are, but like if you are like this, then we will accept you.
Mhm.
So it really speaks about that. So for me, like Paddington, the presence of Paddington uh, has been performative rather than doing anything structurally deep. And with the third film, I feel like any sort of sharp political subcontexts, which I thought were not there in the third film, will be replaced by the family friendly values that the children's movies and they can come. Like, I mean, I like in the marketing campaign for the first Paddington movie, London Heathrow basically said that the Heathrow Express to Paddington, children under 15 would be riding it for free. Where Burton's started campaigning it as where beer turns, and then they gave free Paddington tickets to children. So they were like marketing it as a children's movie as well. So I feel it is more going in the favor of family friendly, being safe, has always been safe, if you ask me, but is very in a very sanitized and a depoliticized manner. That is my take.
But do you think that it's necessary to make something a little more sanitized to make people who don't have these experiences understand it?
I think, unfortunately,
But then if you make, yeah,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think for British people, there's so many of us who are stubborn, and racism is incredibly rampant here. So I think I really agree with you, Ishnor, about how it is like a sanitized way of saying like, oh, you know, if you're going to move to this country, this is how you have to be. But I think a lot of the population here are not nice people who are racist and who do believe that, like, you know, we shouldn't have immigrants here. It should be a British like owned, you know, British people should run rampant in this country. And I think, unfortunately, it is sometimes going to be the only way of pushing it to people if we put it in a lovely little neat package where people can sort of go like, oh, you know, maybe I'm wrong. I think, unfortunately, slapping people in the face with like a, you know, with very hard messaging can be difficult for British people. So I think, unfortunately, as much as I agree with you, I think it is a very sanitized way of saying like, oh, you know, if you come here, this is how you have to be, and you can't, you know, you can't challenge what our culture at all. I think they had to do it in a way that British people would accept it, you know, because I think there are unfortunately, a lot of stubborn people in this country who wouldn't take the message otherwise. So
I think there are stubborn people everywhere in the world, but
Yeah.
I believe like it's not like I'm not saying that like it is sanitized in a manner that like if I would have understood or seen more depth towards to how Paddington thinks and perceives these things, that would have helped. Like I'm not saying them give them the gritty truth.
Yeah.
That is not always possible, but give them some depth to the experiences that this person is having to make it whatever you are trying to make. But if you want to make a depoliticized and a family friendly film, then do whatever the Paddington franchise and whatever they're doing, good for them, do it. But
Yeah.
like my initial association with the film is like more depth into it, more understanding of what is happening, and
Yeah.
would be more useful, I believe.
I definitely
Yeah.
feel
I
feel
agree
like
with
Paddington in Peru definitely lost that. I think it
you. Yeah.
was like you were saying, it lost that perspective of it was more about the Browns, you know, their family growing up and about uh Antonio Banderas and his daughter and whatever the heck Olivia Colman was doing. You know, it was more about that fun than it was about Paddington. It wasn't, even though the story was about Paddington trying to find Aunt Lucy, I feel like Paddington didn't even get any screen time. Like he was not even like he was just doing silly things. Like it wasn't like it
Yeah.
definitely lost that. It wasn't focusing on what
Yeah.
he was experiencing being
I
back in his home country.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it
yeah.
played into that thing of like, you know, how sequels will often try and take the parts that were the most successful
Mhm.
of the previous film and push that as hard as they can in the second film. They took Paddington, you know, the silliness, and even with Antonio Banderas, they took what Hugh Grant had, where he
Yeah.
was hearing all of the different voices and he was playing all the characters.
Mm.
They
It
took
was,
that
yeah, it
whole,
was exactly the same. Yeah.
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I think they really pushed, you know, like all of okay, everything that went well in the first few films, we're just going to push all of that on there. And I think unfortunately, like you guys have been saying, it didn't leave enough room to really give Paddington's perspective anymore. I think it did frame it. I think the good thing about second one is it frames sort of the Browns as they're growing and who they are individually, but they also frame it with Paddington in the middle. And I think that was such a good balance. Whereas in this one, I think you're completely right. You have that part at the beginning where she's like, "Oh, we were all small and we used to fit on this couch once, and now we're all growing up and
Yeah.
moving away." I think that Paddington's very important story does just get lost in the middle completely. I think, yeah, you're right. I think a valuable bit of perspective is completely ignored in this film. I think that is just why it didn't hit the mark in comparison to the other two, definitely.
Yeah.
And for
It
as
spent
long as it
more.
took them to make this movie too, compared to go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead, Will. Were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say I spent more time on the very relatable plot line of Mr. Brown gaining more confidence in his insurance job
Oh
than
yeah, like what?
from his perspective.
Literally, I think for him, they made him such a caricature of who he was before, and that
Yeah.
really annoyed me. Like all of the characters, all of the Browns felt like they were major caricatures of who they were, but specifically Mr. Brown, like
Yeah.
without a doubt.
It was just, I don't know. Okay, well, does anyone have any final thoughts on Paddington? I think that was a pretty good discussion. We hit a lot of good things there. Anyone else have anything else they need
Yeah.
to say?
Scrap
I'm
Wonka
good.
2, Paddington 4, get the band back together.
Exactly. That's our fuck Wonka. You know, they took our director away and made Paddington bad. You know what? It's all Timothy Chalamet.
Hi-
This is the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Hire me as a writer for Paddington.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Film East Chats. To learn more about Film East and our film criticism publications, upcoming events, and unique activities, visit our website, film-east.com, or follow us on any of our social media, at films_east. Make sure you're subscribed to Film East Chats anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube, so you never miss one of our deep dives into films and TV. Again, we're Film East, a global film organization. Catch you next time.